Hello and welcome to another episode of the Supernatural Side Salad Show. So all future episodes of the Supernatural Side Salad Show are going to be on this channel now. I've also added a 24/7 live chat video which you can click on, and it has the same live chat as events have, but the event's never going to happen, so you can use that to have text debates. And there's also going to be a Saturday slot that will be available for one-on-one live debates whenever they happen. Sorry about that. So today we're going to be discussing the Tim Hunt scandal. So I'm going to read a little bit from the Wikipedia page because that seems to have one of the most concise summaries. So this is what the paragraph says. On 9th of June 2015, Hunt gave a speech at the 2015 World Conference of Science Journalists in Seoul, which is in South Korea, and delivered a lunch for female journalists and scientists entitled Creative Science, Only a Game, in which he said, "Let me tell you about my trouble with girls. 3 things happen when they are in a lab. You fall in love with them, they fall in love with you, and when you criticize them, they cry. Perhaps we should make separate labs for boys and girls." Now, seriously, I'm impressed by the economic development of Korea, and women scientists play without a doubt an important role in it. Science needs women, and you should do science despite all the obstacles and despite monsters like me. Some members of the audience tweeted the comments he had made, which quickly became the subject of the Observer described as a particularly vicious social media campaign. The same day, the Royal Society formally distanced itself from Hunt's comments and later emphasised its commitment to equality in the sciences. So that's the basic story. That's a quotation taken entirely from the Wikipedia page. So Tim Hunt made this comment at a convention in South Korea, and as a result of it, he has been sacked from his honorary position in University College London. So what are people's immediate views on this?
Katsai, you want to go?
Some of the things he said makes me think he's running his own experiment, social experiment. Like he said, like monsters like me. Like after he said all of this, it makes me wonder why he would say that. It seems suspicious.
Well, that was the comment that kind of just stuck out to me. I haven't done much in the way of research with this. Actually, I haven't done zero research aside from listening to the Magic Sandwich Show last week. So that part about despite there being monsters like me, I think it kind of hints to maybe what things are like broadly in labs, as maybe specifically physics labs, as Hunt sees it. And maybe it's a message, maybe a little bit tongue in cheek about, listen, there's clearly some issues, and these are some of the issues that I've seen and that I've been a part of, and recognizing that, I want to encourage you to persevere beyond that and do the science, because ultimately what's important is actually getting the science, the physics, the quantum mechanics done. Maybe I'm reading too much into that particular part of it, but that's kind of what stuck out to me as you were reading it was that.
Yeah, you basically say that the Tim Hunt, basically what he said shouldn't be paid too much attention to, because what's the most important thing is what the work they do in the lab.
No, I don't think it's not that he shouldn't be paid attention to, but maybe the way it's being taken is a little too serious, where maybe what he meant was, despite the fact that you're going to run into old peckerheads like me with names and with published papers and with, honorary doctorates and honorary positions, despite running into all that, despite the criticism, despite all these other things that you're going to run into as a female in this field, go forward. Do the work, because we need people doing the work.
Yeah, and basically the social justice warriors were overreacting yet again. I think it was Richard Dawkins that said something along the line of that basically this is a witch hunt again.
And maybe he knew it would be. He's a scientist. I think he's not gonna say anything like that without knowing what is gonna happen. I kind of think he's running his own experiment, or maybe he's doing something on a bet.
Well, I mean, maybe he's at a point in his career where he's proven himself. He's kind of said, look, this is what I'm capable of. This is what I've done. There's no disputing what I've contributed to science. And let me tell you my experience. And maybe he exaggerated it to a point to make an overall point of saying, like, listen, there's nothing you can do to me that's going to ruin my career. That's gonna mess with me from here forward. So this is what's up. This is what's going on, and this is what you need to know. It's kind of like the cold hard truth of the matter. Like, listen, there is a disparity in sciences between males and females, and specifically in those very hard sciences like physics and math. Maybe not mathematics, but quantum mechanics and these things. So let's recognize that, and let's point the finger at some of the old peckerheads like me who are holding you back and say, listen, stop it. It's enough. And take your,
Well,
take yourself.
I don't think he would have said because he is at the end of his career. It most likely is a mistake. What Quantum Overlord did say in the introduction, he lost his position at University College London. I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but I don't know if he lost his job. From what I understood of this subject, is that was an honorary position, so it wouldn't be all a big loss if he did lose his position.
I think it was an honorary position, yes. So it wasn't as if he was fired from his job. But I mean, it's about the principle that the university was taking against him. So that they obviously felt that what Tim Hunt said was too awful for them to be associated with it.
Basically covering their own butts.
Essentially, yes, because they made the argument that it damages their record of equality in University College London. So.
Yeah, I don't have much experience in labs, and I'm not sure how much work he's been doing lately in labs. So I don't know. There are probably people here that do have experience working in labs. So, is there a significant difference between men and women when you're working in lab? Because from my perspective, I can't think of anything.
Not that I know of. There's there's a lot of great women in science. Like, what's the lady that discovered uranium, or not uranium, but that radium.
You're thinking of Marie Curie, Nobel Prize winner in physics and chemistry.
Yeah, and she had to fight really hard, and I can't really think. I'm not really in the science field, but I can't. If there was anyone that was being discriminatory, I think a female scientist would call it out, make it public, and everyone else would be like, "That's not right, man." In this day and age, I don't see how that people could get away with that.
Yeah, because I can from working in a lab, I can't see there being a big difference. Perhaps small percentages between the physics of a man and a woman, because basically the work you're doing in a lab would be based on intelligence and your education. But in other fields of employment, supposedly the police, fire brigades, the military, there are real differences between men and women, and they should be recognized. And I would even go so far as to say that denying that there are differences between men and women in certain employments is basically discrimination, because at least physically, men and women are not the same. So,
I mean, that's an area of conversation we can go into in a bit. I just want to ask people if they think that whether they agree with the University College London. Was the joke, on the one hand, harmless satire, or on the other hand, something potentially very damaging to women in science? Did you want to chip in, Selwyn? Because you haven't said anything yet, so did you want to make a point? Okay. Does anyone else want to make a point on that subject?
Well, the only way I could see it being it's true. Is it if male scientists are stealing the ideas of female scientists, similar to what happens in some universities with some professors. Um, if that's happening, that needs to stop. But I can't see. There's not really much news on coming out of the scientific field like that, so it's impossible to say.
Well, my question was, is this a situation of all sciences, all laboratories, or was this specific to physics and quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and those types of things? Because it would seem to me that it was very specific, this 80-20 split amongst physicists. That was kind of the highlighted point. Am I wrong in that?
If you're talking about the Magic Sandwich Show, I think with regards to what Tim Hunt said, Tim Hunt was talking about all sciences in a general sense, but in the Magic Sandwich Show, in the last Magic Sandwich Show, it sort of dived into looking more at what happened in specifically physics, because the professor that was a guest on the Magic Sandwich Show was a physics professor, so the 80-20 thing was specifically in physics. But generally in science, the picture's not quite as clear, because for some branches of science, such as psychology, the biosciences, it's actually women that dominate rather than men. So it's not the same across all sciences. But with regards to what Tim Hunt said, I think it was a very general remark. The question, of course, is was it harmless satire? That's actually an opinion that I hold it was, or was it potentially damaging, as some other people say?
Well, I mean, one of the other things that got me thinking was that he made three basic statements there, which were men fall in love with women, women fall in love with men, and women cry when you criticize them. And maybe that's his experience, but I think he left out maybe one other factor, which is that men get pissed when you criticize them. So in a laboratory setting, when you have maybe a senior lab, I don't know, whatever you call that person that's overseeing you, when they give you a critique on your work, the way that you react to that, the way that you internalize that, and the way that you externalize that may be viewed by that person in different ways. So if women have a tendency to internalize that in a way of saying, you know, I'm not good enough, I didn't do a good enough job, and they cry in front of the person, well, then that's one thing. And if a guy takes a criticism, the same criticism, and instead keeps himself quiet and says, you know what, fuck that guy, I did some hard work, but you know what, it wasn't good enough, and I'll go back to it, or whatever. I think just maybe the outward expression and the internalization of that is just what that particular person is seeing, what Tim Hunt is seeing, and it might not represent, you know, what's actually going on. Maybe there's just a difference in the way that people express things, and there's a tendency for one group of people to express things one way, and then another group of people to express things a different way. I don't know.
I think Sarah wants to make a point. Yeah, we can hear you. Your mic seems to be on.
Okay, that's nice. First, let me say that I'm not good at English. I apologize for that. Anything that I say in a strange way, just ask. What I think, independent of if he was joking or not, it's when we draw the limits about what is permissible to say or not, even if it's an idea that we don't agree, if it will have repercussions in the job of the person. I think it's quite dangerous when it goes that way. Oh, basically that.
I just wanted to say something that I've known a lot of different men and women, and I've known more women that are more likely to tell you off than to sit there and be quiet. And I've known a lot more men that are going to stand there and take it instead of telling the person off. So I don't know. Maybe he just has had a different experience than I have had, or whatnot. But my experience with men and women has been greatly different.
I think the point is that I'm not sure anyone actually genuinely believes the things that he said. I think the question is whether or not this is reasonable satirical comments, whether this is something that we should not be concerned about because it was said in a satirical comedic context.
Would it have been any different if he had said it anywhere else, or was it the specific forum where he said it that had the impact that it had? Like, if you were on stage at a comedy club, would it have had a different impact, and would people have internalized that in the same way that some of our more like outrageous comedians can get away with saying some pretty outrageous things, but they prompt a discussion and don't get fired, and in a lot of cases they get more publicity. But in this particular case, a guy tried, and ultimately he failed at making a point through satire, whether it was a valid point or not, whether it's just his opinion or his experience or what. Or I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it either, but it seems to me like it's somewhat context, somewhat where he was, and somewhat the nature of the way that people tend to take things nowadays. It's you can't do anything in a professional setting without somebody taking offense to some degree, and I feel like sometimes it just makes things difficult.
Like Susanna, I think Susanna wants to make a point.
I'm just is my microphone on?
That's fine.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I wonder if it's cultural as well. I'm British, and that kind of ironic comment is very common in British culture. And I wonder if some of this is just due to the fact that people didn't, because it came out in print, not in words, if people didn't understand it because of that.
I think, I was going to say, I think in a lot of cases, especially here in the U.S., I think we've got a large population of people who just wake up every day with the intention of just being offended at something, and they just find something to grab onto just to be angry about. And I feel like in some instances we look past. We forget to see that, like, somebody made a joke and it was meant to be just a passing comment and it wasn't supposed to be super serious, and even though it's just one person and one comment and one thing, we grab onto it and we run with it as far as we can until, like, everybody's exhausted and we've still done nothing to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, like, sometimes I get the impression from the European side where it's like, someone said such and such, yeah, fuck that guy. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. Just, like, let's move on. We've got other things to worry about. We have other things that are more important to do. Like, let's do the science. Let's stop worrying about what the science guy said.
I agree.
But here in America we have too many 20-something hipsters that are on Reddit all the time.
I mean, on this point, I think one thing that really does not surprise me is that this was reported on Twitter, so it wasn't reported to the conference organisers. This whole uproar was caused through the medium of Twitter, and it seems like this is something that I would fully expect to happen.
The truth told in 128 characters.
Well, it sounds like viral nonsense, really. I mean, if you break it down that way, it's just viral nonsense. It's just an easy way to take a sound bite and run with it as far as you can, and some of these things catch on and some of them don't, but in the end, it cost this guy whatever it cost him, and I mean, obviously he wouldn't have said it if he was, a young physicist or a young scientist that was just trying to make his bones, but he's been around the block long enough to feel at least confident enough in saying something, and he didn't realize maybe the culture in which he was delving into, when any time you open your mouth in a way that could be construed in any way that you're discriminating or that you're separating two groups or 3 groups or 100 groups from another or what have you, you are going to be, like, called out on it to no end.
Yeah, I think it, but yeah, to me, it's very not being aware of the self-deprecating nature of British comedy. So if I do a painting and someone says it's good, I will go, oh yes, I know, I'm a genius. And what I mean by that is I think I'm crap. But it's because so that statement is an ironic self-deprecation. So he said I'm a misogynistic monster. He was being ironic and self-deprecating because he's actually saying, I know I've got slightly sexist attitudes and I know I'm a man in a big position in science, but it isn't right for people to be sexist. So he's being ironic and self-deprecating by saying, look at me, I'm not special, it's you guys that are special. And he then went on to say, so seriously, we need women in science. But,
well, there's your problem,
yeah.
because here in America, the 20-something hipsters thinks only the 20-something hipsters have right to irony.
Yes.
How ironic.
Yes, I don't know, but yeah, and also someone else's point was, I think it's not the issue of whether he said something sexist. I think it's the issue of, is he a sexist? Is he someone who's consistently doing negative, having negative attitudes towards women, and all the evidence says no? So, I think if someone makes one sexist comment or one racist comment, I don't think that should be enough to get them, sacked or whatever it was that happened, because everyone's got prejudiced attitudes and they do come out. So
that was one of the things that it kind of reminds me, it kind of parallels with, I don't know if you've seen it, this Louis C.K. bit that he did on SNL, I don't know, a month or so back, where he said some things that if you took it out of context, it seemed like such horrible things, but he was pointing to some very deep truths about human nature, and that we will go to kind of the nth degree to achieve a goal if that goal is rooted deep inside of us, in such a way that no consequences really seem to measure up to just taking the action. But it's something you have to recognize. We can't take these things and stuff them in a box and say, no, that doesn't happen, or no, we're not going to mess with that, or we can't talk about that. You have to open up and say, like, listen, this is the fact of the matter. There's an older generation here in the United States, the baby boomers, and they hold some specific views about some specific people, and that permeates between politics and advertising and news and a lot of different places. And then you've got this completely other generation, these 20-something hipsters who are like, I don't care who does what, I want to do whatever I want to do, and I'm just going to it's, whatever it is. I mean, I don't quite understand it, but I kind of I'm somewhere really, honestly, I'm stuck right in between those two generations, like the first of the millennials. So to me, it just seems like you've got one side that's so hell-bent on keeping you in this small box, and you've got this other side that wants to tell you you're free, but they want to keep you in a very small box as well. And there's no way out of it unless you actually have the discussion, unless you say, listen, we're going to talk about this right now. We have to, because it's important.
But where do you set the bounds? Because in this case, Tim Hunt was joking, perhaps, but I happen to have the TV on and I'm watching Top Gear, so you may understand where I'm going to. When do you say, as a society, now we are overreacting, or when do you say enough is enough and you're fired?
Do we all have a distinction here that telling? I guess I'm asking a question here. Is it acceptable to tell sexist jokes purely because they're jokes and they're not meant to be taken seriously, versus actually being sexist? Which I think we're all going to be in agreement that being sexist is a bad thing. I don't think there's going to be any contention on that issue. So,
I don't necessarily see that it's two separate things. Well, not that it's only two separate things, because there are sexist jokes, then there are sexist views, and then there's sexist actions, and then there's this kind of these little microaggressions, I guess, where people get offended about things that maybe 95% of people wouldn't get offended by, So, like, there are sexist jokes like that, just your typical one-liners from back in the day. I mean, I can't think of one right now, but
We
we've
know.
all heard them, right? Like, there's black people jokes, there's Hispanic jokes, there's Jewish jokes, there's a priest walks into a bar joke. There's like 1,000 of these jokes, but like we can't be afraid to like just laugh and have a chuckle about anything simply because we're gonna piss somebody off to the point where they're gonna get us fired. I mean, like, if that were the case, then the church would still be this megalopolis of terror that it once was, right?
Hmm.
I take the position, I'm not a feminist, but I'm all for equality. I recognize our differences. And to use an analogy, basically, when I'm talking to a woman and she would have a low V-cut shirt and she says to me, "Why are you staring at my boobs?" Then my position is, well, don't show them. But it's a normal thing. I am all for equality, etc., etc. But when a woman gets upset because I'm staring at her boobs when they're basically hanging out of her t-shirt, well, sorry, that's not my fault. I'm still a man, so that's my position.
We're checking you out too.
Well, that was the next thing I was gonna say. When I'm out in the garden, kind of doing my work, sometimes it's a little warm, and people drive by and they beep, and it's like, what am I gonna get offended? And it's like, I don't know what the hell they're beeping at. They could be like, hey, your ass crack's showing.
Okay, we can maybe come back to the top topic of feminism a little because we have done feminism a lot on this show. So I'm just going to try and keep it a little bit on topic. So one of the other issues that was discussed in the last Magic Sandwich show was generally women in STEM fields. So what do people think about that?
Women in the STEM field. Anyway, you've got one on the show.
Okay, do you want to give your opinion then? I mean the Fox said last time that they didn't have a woman on the show, and so yeah. I guess we got one. So
yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Is my microphone echoing? Okay, maybe it's not. Oh God. So I'm doing a PhD in ecology, and ecology is actually quite a female-dominated biology. We've got lots of women, and I personally, in biology, haven't noticed that much of a difference between guys and girls. But it was interesting. There was actually an interview on the BBC with a woman who was against what Tim Hunt had allegedly said, and a guy, I can't remember his name, something like Milo something. It's a Greek name, I think, but he was a gay man, and he was sort of saying that in developed countries like Scandinavia, where women have the opportunity to go into STEM subjects, that's the name. Yeah, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. They don't. When they've got the opportunity to go into STEM, they don't. So I think it's a bit mixed because you need to be able to give women the opportunities, and I think there are social cultural things against women in some areas. It's you sort of think I could go into engineering, but I'd be surrounded by men. It's just a fact. I'd say that makes it more unappealing, or possibly less unappealing, or more unappealing, depending on what you're looking for in the class. So I think we should deal with those cultural issues, but at the same time, I think there are. It's a difficult topic. There are cultural things against men going into nursing because they get.
Well, that's interesting that you're mentioning that, because in the past, a few hundred years ago, nurses were all male, but the culture was different.
Mm.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say that this whole thing brings up another point of extremism, and we have a culture of people who say, if you say like the slightest remark and their first response is hang him, like that is a real problem.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I think the trouble with
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say the trouble with that is like for every human being on the planet, that line of when to hang seems to vary. Actually, just for a strange example, I had a local guy drive by my house recently, and he was an evangelical home teaching preacher. I'm not quite exactly sure, but in the course of a 1 hour conversation, this guy brought up everything between the Bilderbergs and Bohemian Grove, Alex Jones, Kent Hovind. I got a DVD, 17 tracks, a bunch of all kinds of stuff that this guy was ready to unload on me, and it was just it was an amazing thing to me that his viewpoint on a lot of the things that I asked him about was so blunt and so outrageous that it actually kind of scared me. At one point, he was talking politics, and I mean, I'm the kind of person, I just ask questions. I don't throw my viewpoint out there when it comes to these kind of people. But he was talking politics, and I said to him, well, just as an inquiry, if you had your way, if your optimal government, if you were able to vote for your optimal government, the people that you've described as degenerates, whether they be homosexuals, adulterers, thieves, liars, all this group of people that he had been explaining to me as, you know, worthy of just hellfire and all these things, he said, would you condemn them to death? And he said, well, after due process, I would be in favor of a government that would take these people out and publicly execute them. And to me, knowing that there's a person in my area that thinks like that, that's one of those lines where I'm like, whoa, hold on a second.
Yeah.
We gotta talk about this, because you have some views that, like, I can't let you get your way. You know what I mean? Like, the population of people who think like him is so small, but the fact of the matter is they are out there. And so he has one extreme view that I think 99% of people think, like, that's nuts. We can't let that happen. And then you have this other 1 or 0.5% of the population who think that anytime you say anything that's in any way construed as discriminatory or like this, I mean, it's only a recent term that I've heard of, this microaggression thing. They fire up to the degree, like, they speak, and, you know, the spit's flying and the flames are shooting out of their eyes, and you have these two groups of people who are acting exactly the same, and if you let them get their way, they're gonna fuck shit up.
Well, to me, the whole term microaggression means people that are looking to be something to be angry about.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier. People who wake up every day looking to be offended. You know, whether it's road rage or religion, or they're just, you know, it's a you know, well, whatever the case may be. They just want to be angry at something.
I'm just going to jump in here because I want to try and give everyone a chance to speak. I noticed that Nathaniel hasn't said anything yet, and Selwyn also wants to make a point. I
was actually going to come in here and talk about this, but then I got caught up the moment I arrived with the Grexit, so I've just been reading about that. I'm sorry.
Okay, did you want to make your point, Selwyn, then first? Because I know you wanted to make a point.
Yes, I can do it. First, I consider myself an egalitarian. I think that we should never discriminate based on gender, race, religion, taste, or anything. What I think, I am against this quote system, where sometimes we give preference to one gender to artificially try to make the same amount of people in the same job or in the.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, so what point were you making, Selwyn? So sorry about that.
I'm talking about the quote system. I'm not so fond of having quotes. First, I don't see a problem if you have, for instance, in physics, like people say that you have 80% men against 20% women. I don't see a problem as far as anybody's given the same chance, both men and women, that nobody's been discriminated to come in. Because I really can't see a difference between a man scientist and a woman scientist if they came there by merit. Why should I choose between one or another? Basically, it's that. I know because I live in Sweden, and here it's a lot of talk about having quotas in different positions. And
This really interesting. So this is a really interesting topic to sort of move on to. I guess the point that you're making is that you're against positive discrimination. That there's nothing, so to speak, positive about it. So that might be an interesting place to go. What do you think about that? So that will be another interesting place to go with this. Well, what's people's views on positive discrimination in general? I say positive in inverted commas.
I'd like to come in with a point on that. I think I agree that there shouldn't be sort of there shouldn't be discrimination on one gender in favour of the other gender, which I think is what someone was getting at. The sort of men, we want women in engineering, so therefore men lose out. I think the only disagreement I would have is if a subject is so discriminate that it's not like
Can someone really tell me how to deal with this, because I'm starting to get sick of it. How do you block people in Hangouts? Because all I can do is eject him. That's the only option that comes up.
You block him his account.
But how can so I've actually got to go onto the settings and actually block him.
No. Click on his name, and
okay,
then
well, I'll just. Okay, so I'm just clicking on someone's name now, and it has hide from broadcast, present to everyone, profile, eject, and mute. There's no block button.
I believe if you mute him, it'll give you the option to block.
Oh,
sure.
Block his YouTube account.
But how do I do that easily?
I don't
Find
know.
his YouTube account.
But how am I supposed to do that? There must be a way to block them easily, just from within the Hangout, because he's going to destroy the entire conversation if he keeps doing this.
Well, I think the trouble is that it's multiple accounts, right?
No, it's one.
No, it's the same account, and I just want to block it, but I don't know how to do that.
well, if you look at the thing down below, the images, I think if you that's profile.
If I click on profile.
Yeah,
okay.
I think when he comes back.
Okay, I've got. By the way, to everyone that's watching, I really apologise for this. It's never happened before.
Don't worry about it.
So I'm just going to try and get.
I blocked or I muted him and blocked him, so he won't be able to rejoin.
Well, you're not, because you blocked him. So only one person has to block him. Okay, yes, thank you. Do I want to block Dark Memes as well? Yes, I do. I want to block him. Okay, I've blocked him.
Yeah,
so that
if
means
somebody
that
actually offed him in a burglary or something.
Just to be clear, people,
I know we're live.
This is I've had a YouTube channel since 2010, and this is the second time I've ever blocked anyone. Literally the second time in 5 years that I've ever blocked anyone. People will not get blocked for joining the show, but when you join with hardcore pornography, of course you're going to get banned. That's just common sense. Don't do it. It just ruins the show for everyone else. Anyway, let's get back to what we're talking about. Positive discrimination.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So I was just saying that I think it's generally a bad idea, but there are cases.
Well, this is getting it. Okay, I'm just going to block. Has someone else blocked that account so I can block that one?
I
as well?
did.
He's making thousands of new accounts. Right. What we're going to have to do is fill up this Hangout with 10 people, just to stop.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Everybody who's out there, fill the room. Keep this cocksucker from ruining it.
Please, if you have an account, it doesn't matter if you don't have a microphone. Just please join, because this is stopping us from going anywhere. It doesn't matter if you don't have an account. Just please join this Hangout so that we can actually have a reasonable conversation here without this happening over and over again. The guy's just making loads of accounts just to do this. It's
In
not
the interim,
I think he had a few accounts. If he keeps coming back.
But it takes me about 10 seconds to block the person because when he plays the video, I'm going to turn the bandwidth down to stop him. Why didn't I think of that in the first place? It'll stop him from showing pornography at the least.
well, I was going to say, why don't you keep it so that your screen is shared or whatever, so that at least we don't have to view it. I mean, you might hear it.
Okay. Well, I put it onto my profile now, so people should only see only see me, and that's a shame because people aren't going to see who's talking. But I think it's better.
Is it possible, if it's your hangout, to have like
Wait.
a password?
Wait, no, you can do something better than that. I'm not sure how, but
Well, I think we'll have to think of some way of this has literally never happened before. So
wait. When somebody comes in, you can make it so that
everyone else
just
talk
don't-
about the subject, and I'll eject them as
just
quickly as
mute everyone who comes in that's new
okay. How do I do-
automatically. You
how-
can do it. There's a setting for that. I'm not sure how, but there's a setting for that, and then you allow permissions from there.
Continue with this conversation, and I'll sort that out. They can't post videos anymore, so this is going to be a little bit easier. So, positive discrimination is what we were talking about, incidentally. Let's try and get through this.
Well,
Yeah, I've made my point. Next person.
well, what I was going to say was, I mean, for everything, there's always kind of two sides, right? So, in this particular case, we're talking positive discrimination in a way where a minority group in a particular area, for instance, women in physics or African Americans in business or any number of types of things, we can always say, well, we want to move more of this particular group into this particular field. Let's say you had, well, I'll give you my example. I run a farm here where I live, and as a result, I'm essentially a stay-at-home father, and because of where I live and some of the other situations that we deal with, I chose to take a secular homeschooling route with my kids. Now, as a stay-at-home father who's looking at a secular homeschool group, there's not one to find that you could join because 90% of them are not secular to begin with.
Yeah.
And the other, what's left of those, say there were 2 of them left, neither one of them are going to accept me because it's typically a group of stay-at-home women who are usually using that time to do, I mean, I don't even know what the hell. Sorry. So I've made a lot of effort to contact groups of women, not specifically women, but groups of other secular homeschoolers to help make things easier for me and my children. But it's damn near impossible when the majority of the people who are doing something similar to me are religious, hyper-religious, evangelical women who, you know, would be forbidden from even interacting with me to begin with, not only because of the fact that I don't believe what they believe, but because, you know, their husband's at work, and there's no way they're hanging out with me while he's there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it kind of goes a little bit both ways, and I realize that, like, I'm a super mega minority, but, like, you know, I feel it on that end in some way, but, I mean, these things do go both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely.
Can I get
Yeah.
some point? Even what I understand what you say, Susanna, that when we have a huge discrepancy, maybe we should work. Even. The only problem that I have is that I think it's kind of a solution. How can I say? A lazy solution. The best solution should be to try to stimulate young people to go to those fields. The problem that I have is quota is that suddenly if you have 2 candidates to a place, and because of a quote system, even if you have a huge discrepancy, one of them gets because of their gender, how fair is to the one that didn't get the place? That person is not guilty to be born in the wrong sex or the wrong gender. Something. That's my.
Who has time to waste doing that shit anyway?
Bloody Troll Sunday, it seems.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but no. So
Well,
I
I
agree with you. I agree with you on that point. I don't think it should be a case of, yeah, that, you know, if you've got 10 places and you've got 10 good men, and you've got 1 woman who hasn't really got the grades, and you should give it to the 10 good men. You know, no, I agree. I just I can understand the desire to try and encourage women in.
And the same, the works both way. If you have 10 qualified women, we should not discriminate and give some place to men just because they are men.
Yeah.
Both way.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
If women are so oppressed in STEM fields, then how come they have access to women-only scholarships?
We just had that discussion. They're not.
I think it's the people for them. Anyway.
Anyway.
I haven't followed any of the conversation, so I can't really, because I'm just concentrating on getting rid of the.
Yeah.
Is it perhaps possible to prevent any new people coming in?
Well, I'll sort it out for next week, but I think for now they'll get bored eventually, and I think Mordred's going to come in later anyway, in about 10 minutes, so we'll get this hangout filled up anyway. So when there's 10 people in. Okay, so people. Anyway, I'll try and continue as best I can. I'm going to try and continue through this. So people are generally, the consensus generally in here is that people are against positive discrimination. Because what the show in the last Magic Sandwich show was making the point that if there were two candidates, a male and a female candidate, and they were both identically equally qualified, then they would rather pick the female candidate because of the sort of value added that it would produce. So what's people's views on that?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down pretty simply. You're talking about people, right? So if you've got two people and they're both equally qualified on paper to do a specific thing that you want them to do, then the next thing to do is to find out which one of them best fits in the social setting of whatever it is that you're doing. So in my experience, it's always been a situation of you have a first interview, then you have a second interview where they kind of show you around and tell.
I'm getting sick of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to join this hangout with a load of suck accounts just to fill it up and stop anyone else from joining. I'm going to try and do that now. I think I should be able to do it.
So what I was gonna, where was I anyway? I keep getting interrupted by this guy.
Really?
You were talking about interviews, that you have two-phase interviews.
Oh, right. So in my experience, usually there's a pool of candidates. Say there's 25 people that interview for a position. The staff or the higher ups decide, okay, well, we're going to call 5 of these people back for a second interview. Let's say 2 of them are exactly the same as far as qualifications on paper. They both interviewed perfectly well, and it's gone really well. Well, it's been my experience that if they're, male or female, and let's just say for sake of argument that we don't need to choose based on gender, what they usually do is they'll put the interviewee, the person who wants the job, in the office or in the facility for a period of time to kind of see how it works out. And you introduce them to everybody else who works in the office or in the lab or here, there, and everywhere, and you get them a chance to visuals on that level, and you say, okay, so we got 2 people, they're both a 10 out of 10 on paper, which one would you guys rather work with? Yep. And it kind of just comes down to, like, oh, well, this person's great because they're really sociable and they seem like, we have a lot in common, or this person brings something brand new to the table that I haven't seen before, and I'd like to have this person. But you kind of end up making a social decision after that, because if you're talking about just strictly, test scores and what people look like on paper, then the only other discriminating factor really could be if you're not discriminating on gender or race or any of these other things, then it has to be how well they work within the setting, because ultimately you're there to do business and you want that person to get along with everybody, because what do you want to do? Have the HR person stomping out fires every time just because, like, you had to hire Susan because, so-and-so, they both had the exact same scores, and it was just a matter of like, so, well, you got to deal with this, I didn't mean to use the name Susan, but you get what I mean. You have to hire somebody based on a particular set of standards that have nothing to do with their sociability or anything like that, but rather just, what they look like on paper, and then you could end up having that person be like a complete nut job in the office. And usually people find that stuff out. If you have 20 people working in a doctor's office, and you interview a few people and walk them around. Usually after the day is done, everybody has a little, meeting, and they say, well, so and so seemed a little weird. So and so was a little bit jittery. This one seemed like they really got along with people. Oh, so and so also raises animals or does this or that or the other thing, and I think I would get along with them or whatever. And then you kind of just make the decision kind of organically after a while. The idea that you have to kind of follow this strict protocol, I think, sometimes leads us into a situation where if you're just stuck with two people and the only fact that separates them is this gender or this race or this other minority thing, then you could end up with a person who is great on paper but who is a complete basket case in the office, and you're stuck with that because you can't say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that I mean, this is a hypothetical situation and it's very idealistic with this, and I don't think you should pick between, male or female based on quota idea of you've got to have even numbers. But the thing is people just do judge people in interviews, and it's not just male or female and what's on paper, but it's how you've dressed, what you sound like, how you talk, everything. So it's actually, and the decision between male and female might be actually quite unconscious, and people think, just in their heads, oh well, we've got enough girls anyway, so we'll pick the guy to even it out. So no, I mean it is quite difficult, but and also those snap judgments do lead to people getting people who are actually psychos and not good at all in the lab or whatever the job is. So it's difficult.
Well, I worked in a place in a manufacturing facility for a short period of time, and it was kind of one of those. They opened the doors, the factory's going to open tomorrow, and they did all the hiring of everybody. They had to hire 140 people, and they hired 140 people in the course of a week from a very small community. So you can imagine that anybody in a small community that was without a job and willing to work starting like in 4 days showed up here and was like, okay, basically what they did was they just said, you're hired. Can you sweep a floor? Can you do this? Can you do that? It was just a hodgepodge of just the absolute, the pick of the litter, really. It was it was a mess. We had one guy that was shooting heroin in the bushes out front. We had another person who sold his uniform from because everybody got a uniform. He sold his uniform so that he could buy booze. We just had an absolute mess of the situation. But the problem was that the mistake they made was that they just hired everybody indiscriminately based on you showed up for the interview, and then they kind of divvied up the jobs after the fact. They had to hire everything from somebody to sweep the floors to somebody to actually manage the entire plant. And they did all of this in a very, very short period of time. It was terrible planning, and the reason I went in for an interview, I was switching jobs. I was just like, I could use a new job, and I'll just check this out. I showed up, shirt, tie, the whole bit, and I ended up getting a supervisory position, making decent money. And 6 months later, the guy who did all the hiring, after we'd worked out all the terrible problems from day one all the way through 6 months, finally we're kind of up and running in a somewhat normal fashion. He said, the only reason I made you a supervisor was because you wore a shirt that didn't have stains on it.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
And it's you have to make a line somewhere, and when you're met with a tide of garbage, and I don't mean these were terrible people, but they were just, like I said, you have a small community, there's not much to pick from, so everybody that has no job showed up, and it was just it's most of the. To be honest with you, some of the people showed up knowing that they were only going to make it to the first paycheck.
Yeah.
It's I'm going to get the first paycheck, and then I can go off and do whatever I'm going to do. And then there were other people who knew that as long as they kept the job for a period of time, long enough for them to qualify for food stamps, they would then find a way to get fired so that they could then qualify for food stamps. We ran the gambit of just just awful. And then there were some people who really, really worked out. But there was no way to discriminate. I couldn't tell you if it was white or black or male or female, this and that, the other thing. We just took 150 people who walked in the door, and we started sorting them as they came. You know, it's like, okay, you clearly have about 4 brain cells to rub together. I need you to like scrub this pot over here. You know what I mean?
Can I ask what kind of a factory was it that could do that?
Well, it's a food production facility. I won't specify, but let me just say that there's a lot of processed food I don't eat anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know a few persons that work in an ice cream factory and they never eat ice cream ever again.
Yeah, that's the way I am with. I'll just say it's baked goods. I watched a guy smoking a cigarette, picking his nose with one hand, and with the other hand with his arm. Now, you know, 6 foot tall guy with, you know, he had like hair from the tips of his fingers all the way up to like, you know, his armpit. I mean, this is just one big hairy dude hand mixing dough, and you just knew, you know, after that stuff came out, there was going to be arm hair and fingernail crud and all sorts of stuff in that baked good, and it was just an awful situation all around.
So I think I want to start moving on the conversation and talk about the last thing that really came up in a big way on the last sandwich show episode. So we've talked all about disparity of between males and females in the STEM fields. So what are people's views on why this disparity exists, and is it a problem that we need to solve, or is it something that we should accept as being, I don't know, the way things are? What's people's views on that?
I personally think that must be some mix between nature and nurture, but I never saw any I say definitive research on the field. I don't know if you guys know.
I think, you know, Susanna pointed out earlier that in the biological sciences, that things are actually kind of flipped. You have more women in those fields doing work than you do men, and as Professor Moriarty pointed out last week, you have this 80-20 split when it comes to physics. Now, one of the things that came to my mind, and I'm just riffing here for a second, so don't take this too awful seriously, but if you want to take it back evolutionarily, and you have to divide up the workload somehow and keep a society running, we know that in a hunter-gatherer society you have the men typically doing the hunting, and you have the women typically doing the gathering. And this is kind of by virtue of the fact that somebody has to watch the baby, and because mom has the ability to feed the baby, mom's kind of dealing with that job. And because men are a little bit more dispensable, being that they don't have to provide sustenance for an infant, they're more able to kind of range a little bit further and take care of those tasks. So one thing that kind of I thought about was an effective hunter has to have some instinct to accomplish that task, to throw a spear, to fire an arrow, to fire a gun, to do the things that we think of like macho hunter men kind of doing, to like fire a projectile far enough, accurately enough, hard enough to actually do something that provides for their family.
Well, that's one of the known differences between men and women, allergy, that men have a better spatial recognition. I'm not sure if I'm getting the English terms correct, but a better perception of their surroundings. I'm not sure.
So what I was going to say was, you know, if you extrapolate that out, you might find that women would gravitate more towards those things, those sciences where observation and nurturing and maybe think of biology as maybe a slow science where you're keeping an eye on systems for a long period of time. You're watching things grow. You're seeing things develop. You're noticing behavior, abnormal and otherwise, whereas in physics, whereas in a hunter type setting, your main objective is don't make any noise that's going to scare the thing to run, and when it does, your fight or flight instinct at that point needs to kick in, and your focus is to launch your arrow or your spear or your whatever to the target. So maybe men tend to gravitate towards those things where their brains understand things spatially in a very quick, rapid-fire way that you see in physics, like you see in quantum mechanics. It's
but the trouble with that is that the differences can't be as large as that would seem to imply. Otherwise, we wouldn't see as much as 80-20. Because I mean, even though 80-20 sounds quite a big disparity, in reality, it isn't that much of a disparity. A big disparity would be something like 1,000 to 1. But and I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the differences in performance are, but they're certainly not that significant. So. As a point of interest, the research on this subject seems to indicate that the biggest factor in all of this seems to be differing choices. So rather than aptitude differences, which I'm not saying that there aren't aptitude differences with regards to what you just said, but it seems that the biggest factor seems to be the fact that men and women tend to make different choices. But of course, the one argument would be that, well, if that's the case, then why is it that women tend to gravitate towards the subjects that tend to be lower paid as a general rule? What do people think about that?
I think it's to do with what the higher paid jobs are. So there's been this thing about why aren't there so many senior scientists, female scientists, and I think it's because when you're a senior scientist or a professor, most of your job is actually managing other people, and I don't want to manage other people. I want to do science. I don't want to be directing other people and sorting them out when they're not working, and those are the higher paid jobs. So if you're a professor, you're more likely to be in a managerial kind of job. And some women like that, and there are senior female scientists, but it's sort of like, I think the senior scientist goes towards this sort of you have to be able to be quite aggressive. And so if someone under you is not doing their work, you need to be able to call them up on it. And I don't think a lot of women want that. That's just my perception. But obviously, if you're a man and you come out and say, women don't do this work because they're not as aggressive, you'll get slammed for sexism. But I think it's right. Or at least I think there's a lot of women who that's why they don't go for senior positions, because they know what it entails.
Playing devil's advocate a little bit here, the sort of stock response to that would be that you have this internalized misogyny. That seems to be something that comes up quite a lot. How would you respond to that sort of criticism?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of it's a sort of is-ought to me, that sort of. And it's true that if a woman is aggressive and managerial, so directs other people, leads them, and is seen to sort of put their foot down when perhaps a younger scientist says, I don't want to do this work, and you've got to put your foot down. They're seen this is a woman being bossy, being a bitch, and so there's an extra. There's a cultural thing as well that means women don't want to go for this. But it's this is-ought. Should women, it's a case of, yeah, women can do that and fulfill that role, but the reason that job is paid well, and the reason women start acting like that to fill that role, to become professors, to lead people, is because we value that attitude in society. So the question is, should we do that? And that's kind of, it's like with the, going back to the original topic, the Tim Hunt comments that he allegedly made, whether it was a joke or not, saying that women cry when criticised. Well, the problem is that is seen as a negative thing. I cry when I'm criticised sometimes. I don't give a fuck, to put it bluntly. So, comment.
So, what would happen, do you think, in a situation if Tim Hunt were critiquing a male student or a male, and that person were to break down? What do you think his reaction would be in that situation? Because I kind of get the impression, like, if we're just talking about, like, old white guy professor kind of just as a general statement, and he said the things he did and he kind of did it jokingly, he didn't seem to think that, or it didn't seem to me to come across as like a, like a derogatory kind of like, well, just shut up and just do the damn work. It's just like, okay, look, I did this thing and this is the reaction I got. Like, I would almost imagine that, he would critique a male student and he would get tears. You know, if this male student were to have the same reaction as what he's used to seeing from females, he would be even more put off by that than he would be by a female. No? Do you think that? Yeah. And then in that case, do you think that as a male crying, do you think that Tim Hunt would view that male as a lesser male than he would a crying female as a lesser female? Does that make sense? I mean, maybe I'm mixing my words.
I know exactly what you're saying. And I don't know because I don't know him. But I think, regardless of how Tim Hunt meant it, that the reason people got upset at him saying it is because they perceived him as saying it negatively. And then there is this perception, and I'm a feminist. I'm very vocal about men's rights, and I think, and again, this is a sort of is ought thing. I think men should be able to cry if they want to. But if I say to you guys, you've got to be able to cry, you'll probably say, well, I don't want to, because you've been, whether you feel that or not, and some of you may not feel that, but I think a lot of men feel, have grown up in a culture where they are expected not to cry.
It depends on the job.
Yes.
Because I can tell you, I'm in the army.
Yes.
And it's not supposed to be a good thing. Well, of course, everybody can cry when you're in a particular tough situation. Of course, it's okay to cry, but being basically a male institution overall, it's seen as a negative thing, and I can understand it may be a positive thing. But I recall an incident in which I had to march a few soldiers out of the gate, and we were 2 or 3 kilometers out of the gate, and one of the girls started complaining about sore feet. And the first thing I thought to myself, seriously, what the hell are you doing in the army? So it also depends on the job how you perceive physical and emotional distress.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting actually. Someone was saying, I can't remember if it was on Twitter or on Reddit, but someone was saying the point of feminism is to one of the points of feminism is to make things that are perceived to be female to be perceived in a positive light. So the fact that when a man cries, it's seen as a female thing, and that's why he's insulted for it. But it's like that female thing of crying is a positive thing, but obviously it's not a female thing. It's meant to be for everyone, and it's
exactly. Is it a male thing or is it a female thing? I really think it also depends on the culture.
Yeah. Oh, of course, and but yes, but no, there are lots of women, unfortunately, who sort of go, it's perfectly okay to cry, it's fine, and then when a man does it, turns around and goes, oh, you wimp, what are you crying for? And it's like, please. Yeah, but no, it's dependent on a lot of things. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what Tim Hunt would say about it, but I think there should be a cultural sort of social movement to because what often crying is not understood. I can cry because I'm extremely pissed off. It's an emotional response, and it doesn't have to be if someone criticizes me and I cry, that doesn't mean I can't take criticism. It means I'm crying and I'm hearing criticism.
Well, every person is different, of course.
Yeah.
So, Susanna, I wanted to ask you, because you brought up something you mentioned about value and the value of a position as seen from a female perspective, where you want to do science, you want to just do the work, and you don't want to have to deal with some of the managerial type things that go along with it, like managing people, time off, my kids are sick, but this, that, the other thing. I was wondering, because I've heard it before in a few other places, where people have suggested that the reason that you don't see more outspoken, vocal women, whether it be in the great debate community or in science or in politics or any of these big public forums, like the reason that you don't see as many as you do men is because women have a different value set such that they value multiple things in a way where they don't throw all their eggs into one basket like men will tend to do. Men will, and I'm just speaking broadly, but I guess the attitude that, well, or the position that was pointed out to me was that men will kind of say, okay, no matter what it takes, no matter what I'm going to do, no matter what hell I'm going to catch, I'm going to move forward on this thing, and I don't care how long it takes or how hard it hurts or what I have to sacrifice to get there, I'm going to get there. And a lot of them end up, suffering like high amounts of stress and heart attacks and diabetes and all these terrible things that go along with these high-stress lifestyles. I wonder if you could give me a little bit of information or a little bit of knowledge from a female perspective as somebody in science, whether or not that you find value in other ways, in other things that add to your life, but don't necessarily broadcast to the remainder of the world.
Okay, well, it's interesting that you say that as a distinction between male and female, because I've always seen that as a distinction between a certain type of personality. So if you think of someone who is an athlete, they put all their energy into one thing, and push for that one thing and dedicate their entire lives to that one thing, and you get female and male athletes, and that's just what they do. Whether that's a case of it's that personality type, but that personality type is more common to men, that might be it. I certainly am someone who, I always say I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I like to do many, many different things, talk to many, many different people, be educated on many different things. I sort of think science as my work life, and certainly it is the case that I'm doing work that I love, but I'm very much an artist in my spare time, and I create things and make things for people, so I do value having many different skill sets, but I would also say that because I am the person who, because I value science quite greatly, when I get really into my work of science, everything else does tend to fall to the wayside, and I am very focused on doing my science, and it can be the case that social life and everything else and all the art and stuff I value falls to the side, because I've just published my first scientific paper, and that was huge amount of work, and everything else kind of went to pieces while I was just focusing on that one thing. But so no, I think that's quite interesting that you see that as a male-female idea.
Well, I didn't want to say that I saw it as a male-female thing. I mean, I wanted to say that it was presented to me in such a way where when the particular individual, I'm not going to name any names because it was an off-air thing, but it was basically presented that when this person was out to breakfast, and there was a lot of complaints from women saying, like, well, I don't, well, there's not enough women representation in our field, in what we do, and, you need to do something about this. This was being directed at a male leader in this particular field. And so he said, well, why don't you do something? Why don't you stand up? Why don't you lead? If you don't think there's enough women leaders, you know your stuff, you know what's going on, you're involved, you have as much knowledge as I do as anybody else, why don't you do it? And the response that he got from her was essentially like, I don't want to have to deal with the bullshit, I would rather relax and read a book every once in a while. You guys have to deal with so much bullshit from people because when you propose an idea, you get backlash. And when you get backlash, you either have to, like, stand your ground and kind of persevere, or you have to, like, find something else to do. So I guess what I'm understanding from you is that when push comes to shove, you shove back, and when it comes down to the data, you stick with it. And to me, that's a very admirable thing. And it would be for anybody to do, but it's been proposed to me, and I don't know whether or not it's true because I don't have enough experience in this to know. But when push comes to shove, a lot of women would say, "Well, you know what? You fight that battle. I'm just going to do the work. Like I don't want to be out there on the circuit writing books and talking and debating and doing all these things. I would rather be getting up, doing my job, doing my work, coming home, spending time with my family, having different things that I value, rather than putting everything aside entirely and focusing on one thing." I get the impression, and I'll let you speak in just a second, I get the impression that you almost straddle two worlds in a way that I do, where you have there's the science portion of things where it's like you have that drive to kind of, when the science is important, that's what you do, and you'll hunker down and focus on it, and everything else can go away. And I can do that, and I do that quite often too, and often to the neglect of other things that need to be done in my life. And I feel, well, maybe I don't feel, but I feel the person that was expressing this to me had the idea that many women are not willing to make that sacrifice for a long enough periods of time to be held in the same regard as some of these upper echelon speakers and men. Not to say that the work isn't being done or the knowledge isn't there, but rather the value set is broader for women, and so you don't see them in these upper echelon positions because it's just not something that they're interested in pursuing as much.
Yeah, so I think I've got a couple of points on that. I agree with everything, and I think that's sort of what I was saying about the bullshit. It's like this managerial, having to be aggressive. And I think I would say, again, if I was a man, someone would say I was sexist for it. But I think there is women, whether through nature or nurture, I think there's a bit of being taught it, but a lot of us, I think, are designed for avoiding conflict. Not all of us. Some women are very eager to like get into conflict and stuff. But I can't deal with shouting. I can't deal with people being angry. Watching some of the atheist debates on YouTube, I can't do it because people start getting pissed at each other.
I'm with you on that. I can't stand it. It drives me up a wall. I just have to turn it off and it's like, give me a discussion, but when people start arguing, I can't. It stresses me out and I have to go outside.
Yeah, you can watch Richard Dawkins and Rowan Williams talking to each other because they're both Anglican and everyone's happy. But apart from that, but yeah, so I think there's because that's the thing and it depends which science you're in, and it depends which university department you're in or research thing. But in certain departments, certainly you have to be very ready to meet conflict if you're going to be a professor, if you're going to be a manager of scientists, because you'll bump up against argumentative personalities. If you're in a lab where everyone gets on and has civil discussions, that's fine, and you can be. If I was in that kind of place, I could be a professor and I would be happy being there. But I couldn't be in a place where lots of basically it's a pissing contest. And you do get that in science. So I think there's that in the professor thing. And then there's the fact that, both because, let's face it, it's biology, women are the ones that have to rear the kids, at least until they're past breastfeeding age, in which case, if they've got a stay-at-home dad like you, they can do that. And go back to work, but obviously it depends on who you're married to. So that fact really puts back. That's why my mum is a senior researcher and my dad has been a professor since he was 36 or something, because he wasn't the stay-at-home parent. so there's that, and yeah, and I think it's just also because and women perhaps are more willing to stay at home. Women value relationships, and we value the quality of relationships. So I think we're much more willing to get along with people rather than be as competitive, I think, and I think that's why we don't do the public thing as well. It's like, I'm a Christian, and I quite like arguing, talking with atheists, but I'd rather we all went and bought a beer and talked about it than having a pissing contest. I'm much more rather having relationships with people and having discussions than having, fights. But anyway, that's just me. Someone else talk.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog, but I always have these questions, and you keep spurring these questions.
That's cool.
So when it comes to sciences and pissing contests, if men, or let's just speak broadly again, if you feel like the male personality is more prone to the pissing contest, where it is like, I've got to have, I see it in my kids. I have one of each, a boy and a girl, and my son, he just wants the biggest, the best, the fastest, the hardest, you know what I mean? Like, what's the biggest star? What's the biggest planet? What's the fastest spacecraft? What's the biggest rocket? What's the biggest bomb? Like, they just want the most destructive. They want the biggest, baddest, messiest thing that they can, And it's a pissing contest to have the best, to have the most. And I don't see that with my daughter. To her, it's just like, well, let's make a story together. Like, it doesn't have to be about the biggest. I mean, we can talk about a big one and a little one and a medium one and the interactions between them. But that's when we talk about sciences. Do you feel, or what are your views on the value of the pissing contest drive in things like physics? Specifically because, and I guess I just pick on that because that's what Professor Moriarty was speaking about last week, and it seems to be the biggest discrepancy. What is it that drives that, such that is it a giant pissing contest to see whose electrons are fastest, or whose MEV or whatever is the most accurate, or whatever it is supposed to be? What's the discrepancy there? Do you have any insight on that?
I don't know if I do. I think I just see it as, like everything, we live in a, we humans tend towards hierarchical societies. And when you've got any hierarchy with power, people want the power. And if you've got it, and if you're the type of personality who feeds off that, you will want to hang on to it. And it's not, and it's also the fact that, science is driven by funding. Everyone wants the funding because that's how you get your research done. And it becomes counterproductive, basically, because and I'm not, the competitiveness in science is a good thing, because that's how you get the drive to work, because it's it's publish or perish. But that can lead to some very negative attitudes, and I think particularly in the sciences where it is male dominated, and I don't know if it's, I don't want to make some kind of pseudo evolutionary comment where it's like, oh, you're full of testosterone, so it's all, it's trying to be alpha male. I don't want to do that, but it's like you can get those types of dynamics occurring, and it's because the other foundation of science is collaboration, and you've got to be able to collaborate with other people. So that's my point on it, which isn't really a point.
Well, the whole of human progress over time is based on cooperation. So
I know I said I wouldn't do this, but I just wanted to come back briefly to a comment that you made earlier, Susanna. Well, which is quite interesting, because you actually said that you identified as a feminist, which I think is quite interesting, because a lot of people in this room who have pretty much the same views as you on this subject would be very much against feminism. So what's your view on the whole feminism versus anti-feminism type thing?
Well, I think it's exactly the same as saying I'm a Christian. You know, it's like I have to say I'm a Christian, but if you're in a room full of, well, I don't know where everyone's from here, but if you say you're a Christian and there are Americans in the room, you go, it's okay, I'm secular too, you know. And so if you're a feminist, you've got to come in and say, but it's okay, I don't hate men. And it's simply because the arseholes are the, you know, to put a finer point on the metaphor, arseholes produce the most shit. So you know, it's because there are so many loud, and I think it's also because feminism, a lot of people who are loud and are feminists also belong to the politically correct, you know, this idea of political correctness. And there are so many problems with that, you know, because I'm a champion of free speech. But basically, I'd say that, you know, if I'm in a room of people and we're talking about equality of sexes, if you want to use the word egalitarian, then I think it's completely fair to say I'm an egalitarian. It's just because I value the word feminism, both because there are still horrendous abuses that are very targeted towards women in the world, and also because I value the history of it and things like the suffragette movement. So it's really kind of tradition habits using that label, rather than there's a difference between feminism and egalitarian, because I don't see a difference between the two.
You value the word feminism, even though the third generation feminism has a very negative side to it, because that's basically why I say I'm not a feminist, I'm for equality.
Yeah, well, I think you probably use the word egalitarian as well. That basically means you want equality for sexes. But so,
understanding the differences between them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that I don't see a difference between the two words. To me, they're identical.
No, not the words. I mean the biological differences.
Oh yeah, no, there's biological. I'm a biologist.
Yeah,
so,
we talked about that difference in certain jobs, some aspects.
I think the thing to bear in mind here is that because I think broadly we are actually in agreement over all these issues. It's just a matter of a label thing. So I mean, when I had a debate on feminism with the true Puka, he asked me whether I was a feminist, and I said I wasn't. I was an anti-feminist. But despite all that, I share basically the same views that you do. And to me, it really doesn't matter what people choose to identify themselves. I think that's really the least important thing. It's the ideas are far more important than the labels that people choose to describe themselves as. Anyway, I only brought it up just because I thought it was a very interesting. It was just an interesting observation, because I don't usually meet sort of what's the right word, meritocratic feminists like you, or sort of,
I don't know what that means.
Or like people that are, you know, like merit over sort of discrimination. So instead of having quotas and positive discrimination, be, you know, very the best person should get the job regardless of their race, their skin color, their gender, that sort of thing. Versus this sort of, as you described it, politically correct feminism. So as you use the label, then I'm very happy to call myself a feminist as that. But I don't want to get into a semantic discussion. It was just a very brief observation. I'm fine with it, really.
Yes, well, I think that's why you need conversation, isn't it? You know, at the end of the day, and that's what happens on Twitter, is someone says something and there's no room to have a conversation. There's just room to target the words they have used, you know, and that's what happens.
I have to ask, though, because you're also a Christian, and there are some atheists here in the room, of course.
Of course.
What is your feminist perspective of the Bible?
I think there's a lot of anti-feminist stuff in it. Well, I think there's a lot of discrimination in it. I think it was written, you've got to take it in the context, and a lot of that context is bad. However, I think for his time, Jesus was a radical feminist. You know, the rights of women in the Christian world compared with the outside world, at least a lot of it, was
even though Jesus said that he did not came to earth to change the laws as they were already. So basically, he said what is told in the Old Testament. I 100% agree with that. And there's a lot of anti-female stuff in the Old Testament.
Yes, there is.
Sorry.
There are contradictory verses in the New Testament, and what Christians see, that there is a verse about not one jot of the law will pass away until all is fulfilled. To Christians, Christ fulfilled the law, meaning that none of the Old Testament applies to our lives now. It's defunct, which makes the American habit of putting the Ten Commandments everywhere very amusing. But anyway, yes.
There's also theories that I've listened to various Christians speak about where that there were things that Jesus had to say.
Yeah.
Because, he would have gotten killed earlier, I guess. It's kind of the theory, I guess. But, I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's just my take on the whole. I mean, it's pretty easy to, take the better, I guess, moral sort of parts about the story of Jesus and sort of negate some of the sort of oddities about it with that sort of viewpoint. But yeah.
Yeah, well, you can cherry pick the good and you can cherry pick the bad. It's what are you looking for? But anyway, I was thinking we should have a day doing one of these on offence and religion, because I'd find that quite interesting. And I actually I'm friends with someone who works to try and reduce extremism in Muslim men, and particularly young men and women, because of the whole ISIS problem. So I'd be interested in talking about that. But
that would be something I'd really like to do. It'll be as the supernatural side show, it is mostly popularized in the atheist community, but I really do like getting people with religious faith on as well, because it's so boring when everyone has the same opinion. So it'll be really interesting if we could have that sort of conversation. So maybe in 2 weeks' time we can do something along those lines next week. But it's been really interesting to have you, actually, not just as someone from the perspective of a female scientist in the STEM, but also as a Christian, because, like I say, this tends to be atheist dominated, so it's quite interesting to have religious people on here as well. So
I'm in because I'm British, which means I'm Christian, I'm scientist, I'm liberal, I'm secular. I go to skeptics meetings. This is one of the interesting things. I'm actually writing a blog post for my friend's website about this. That and then what I was going to say came out of my head. But just the fact that I probably have more in common with an American atheist than I do an American Christian, which is weird, but it's true.
I actually in the last Magic Sandwich episode we briefly covered this. I think it's been something we've covered quite a few times. Actually, I think it was done before. I think Mordred could testify to that. But basically, the point I made there was that in Britain, if you're a Christian in Britain, it might mean that you go to church every week, and there's sort of this traditional Christianity where you go to church, you attend like the midnight mass, that sort of thing. But that's really as far as it goes. There's no sort of evangelizing form of Christianity in Britain. And if you're an atheist in Britain, people tend to be fairly apathetic about it. Whereas in America, it's very much polarized. If you're a Christian, you tend to be very evangelical. Of course, there's creationism and Mormonism in America, which is very big, and the and anti-theism that sort of goes against it. So what I think is that it's interesting that the America, despite being a secular country in name, and the UK being a Christian country in name, it's actually more the other way around, whereas the UK is very much secular, whereas America religion gets very much involved in politics. And I'm sure you follow the general election, but religion didn't come up in the general election. It was the NHS and immigration, you know, all these other issues. Religion didn't even make the list because it's so irrelevant to what people are interested in. Whereas in America, it will be the number one thing on the list. Whereas in the UK, it doesn't even make the list.
Yeah, well, it's actually, you know, whereas you have this situation where if someone isn't Christian, they won't get voted in. We have a Christian party. I'm a practicing Christian, and I'd never vote for them. You know, I wouldn't want to vote for them because I don't want a political party based on one. I don't know, but one ideology that will sort of seep into everything else. You know. So.
Would I be able to ask you a question? I was just curious because I grew up I'm in Australia, and I was brought up in like a Pentecostal sort of church environment, and I was raised as a Christian, and I believed in Jesus, and I, you know, didn't get baptized as such, but certainly, definitely believed in God and that sort of thing. But anyway, I was just going to ask you, at what point does God sort of enter into your current like sort of world view picture, if that makes sense? Like, where does God impact in your, like, where is God in your life, if that makes sort of sense?
Yeah, it's hard to say because it really permeates everything, in the sense that God is my motivation for everything I do, but no, but so God is a motivation for everything I do, but that includes doing science, and that includes being a liberal, and that includes being secular, because to me, what my religion is the command to love God and love my neighbour. Well, then how do I love my neighbour? By using the tools I know to be the best ones, like science, to get more knowledge for people. I'm studying climate change and ecology, and it's because I want to, you know, look after the world that God created, and I want to help everyone else because climate change is going to have really bad repercussions for us. And so, but I'm, to me with religion, the issue comes in that there are three aspects of religion. There are your beliefs, your supernatural beliefs. Then there are your beliefs about beliefs. So I believe that there's a God, but I don't believe it's my duty to tell everyone else what to believe. I don't believe that I'm obligated to do certain things like go to church every Sunday. And those beliefs are both about, you know, so beliefs about the supernatural beliefs, but they're also beliefs about ritual, and that's the sort of the going to church. So that when I see these sort of Pew surveys saying less and less people going to church, the thing is that doesn't tell you anything about what people are believing. It just tells you that less and less people are going to church. And I think people's rituals are changing over time. I think we're becoming more individualistic, and people are turning to more things like mindfulness and you know, individual religion rather than group religion. And so people may still have the beliefs, but I think there is a reduction in things like evangelism. So
what then is your perspective on sciences that basically say that it's a difficult word for me to speak out, the reality of that humans has a biological cause, fields of science like evolutionary anthropology.
Yeah, so I think it's totally fair to say that humans may be
hardwired for it.
Hardwired for it. Yeah, but the thing is, and you know, this is the thing, that being evolved to do something says nothing about either whether it is right or wrong, or whether it is a good reflection of reality or not. So you know, rape is natural. Doesn't mean it's good. But there are lots of instincts we can trust, and that the instinct for empathy though is good, and so we the fact that we are evolved, that we could have a hardwiring for religion, or hardwiring to find the super, to look for things that are supernatural, does not tell us either whether it is false or correct. So, but I find it very interesting, and I find the kind of neuroscience, like they did that study on intercessionary prayer, then that was really interesting. Anyway, I finished talking. Next person.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, it's always interesting to like get into, because to me that's probably number one most important thing to me. I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I have problems going deeper into it, I suppose, but it's more of a an open forum type thing, philosophically, talking about first cause, well, ultimate first causes or prime movers and that type of thing. But to me, the most important thing, is that you're dealing with the natural world and the realities that we all face, in terms of nature and everything like that, in the same way, because we all need each other to be able to tackle some of these problems like climate change, which is great to hear that you're involved with it.
No, I think it's really interesting to have these discussions and talk to each other about them. I mean, I'm reading what's it called? A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss. So maybe I'll find out about the so-called first cause or something. But it should be pretty interesting.
As far as I laymanly understand the whole thing, you could still insert God beyond that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, but I mean, have you read his book?
I haven't read his book. I've listened to the lecture that he gives, or based on the book, I guess, but that's pretty pathetic. I haven't actually read it myself, no.
Well, it's really good, but I find it fascinating, because it's like he says about how in physics they use nothing to refer to something, to like the vacuum and space controlled by physical laws, and it's like, so it's something, but it's still nothing. And so when they said before the Big Bang there was nothing, it's like they didn't mean the nothing I was thinking of.
Yeah, it's just basically what definition do you give to the word. I heard a mathematician saying once that the greatest invention ever was the discovery of zero.
Mm.
And nothing is not nothing, it still means something, but it depends on the discussion you're having and what it specifically means. In mathematics it's zero and it still has a value, but when you start talking about other topics, sometimes nothing is indeed nothing, but when you're touching by the crossroads of religion and atheism versus science and the Big Bang, etc., nothing could still mean something because something caused it. Yeah, it's funny to think about it. Yeah. It's just the definition you're using.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting to think that if we use nothing to mean, the absence of anything, does nothing exist in the universe? Is there anywhere where there is actually nothing?
Mm.
It's weird.
Well, it's supposed to be a black hole. Well, that's one understanding I had, but that's obviously out the window.
I could try and answer it from a physics point of view. I try not to talk about physics on here because it bores people. But in physics, there's a concept known as 0-point energy, which means that if you take a lump of matter, I don't know what it is, and you cool it to absolute zero, which is of course the lowest possible temperature you can go, then the lump of matter still has energy. It doesn't have thermal energy, but it still has energy. It has this sort of energy, that's this minimum amount of energy called 0-point energy, which is an artifact of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which you might have heard of. So basically, even a complete vacuum, even in a total vacuum with absence of matter, absence of energy, absence of light, that sort of thing, the vacuum itself still has this very small amount of energy associated with it, and this energy can actually be used to create particles sometimes. It's called virtual pair production. So even nothing actually does, in our universe at least, there is something associated with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. It's like,
That's a good.
yeah,
That was a good.
we got off
That was
the
a good.
topic of Tim Hunt, didn't we?
explanation, yeah. Oh, we'll boring quantum it anyway because he hates philosophical debate.
Awesome.
But the one
I don't mind philosophical. By the way, but people are calling me quantum because my YouTube channel.
I wasn't going to call you supernatural side.
No,
I
okay.
just
my YouTube channel is quantum overload in case people are wondering about that. But I like the philosophical discussions. It's just that I disagree somewhat with Ozymandias on some of these things. So that's quite controversial because he is like the philosopher of the community these days. And don't get me wrong, I really like him, but I do disagree with him on a couple of these philosophical issues. So.
Yeah, I talked
don't
to him
mind
about 2 or 3
talking
times.
about it.
I can't get around him sometimes, so because he's so knowledgeable, so. And I'm such a layman on those issues. But it's very nice talking to him anyway, so.
One thing that I like very much with Ozymandias is that he very seldom he builds any straw man of people. It seems that he can understand well what someone means, at least.
I've noticed
I
that
totally
too.
understand that. So.
Yeah, I mean, even in the last Magic Sandwich show, I found there was someone commented, which I thought was quite amusing. Even in such a contentious hangout, and it was because it was Thunderfoot, Thunderfoot, who's obviously controversial at the best of times, versus Professor Moriarty, and they were having quite a big debate on feminism. And someone commented, even in this sort of situation, people still say, "Just shut up and listen to Ozzy," which I thought was quite amusing. Because he is really good. He has got a rather massive knowledge on the subject of philosophy, and it really is respect worthy. But yeah, so
Yeah, not only that, you're also very sharp in understanding a conversation and reacting on it, and that's something very rare and special to get in conversations.
Anyway, I think maybe we should finish now because I don't want to drag this on beyond the point that people are going to get a little bit tired. So I think it's been a really good episode today. So in case people are interested, I'm just going to talk about future shows briefly sorry. So if you want to watch previous Supernatural Side Salad show episodes, they're actually on my personal YouTube account. So that's youtube.com/Quantum Overlord, and you can see a year and a half, because we've actually been going on for a year and a half now, a year and a half's worth of past Supernatural Side Salad show episodes. But all future of these episodes are going to be on this channel. So if you want to see future episodes, please subscribe to this channel. But please also add the Quantum Overlord Google Plus account, the one with the Q avatar, to follow. Make sure you follow that one, because then you'll get the fortnightly invite, because I'm still using that to send invites to people. Other than that, there's a chat room that's on this channel where you can it's like an event that's happening in 2016 that's never going to happen, where you can just have a live conversation on there if that's the sort of thing that you want to do. And the next show will be in 2 weeks' time. I quite like Susanna's idea of doing a hangout on religion and offence, so we'll maybe do that in 2 weeks' time. So thanks everyone for joining, and I apologise about the disruption. I will have to edit. I'll have to redact some of the footage, because I can't YouTube won't let me keep this up if all that footage is kept in. So if the footage is of poor quality, I apologise. Some trolls came in and started posting pornography, so unfortunately that's going to have to be redacted. Thanks everyone for joining, and good day.